Good evening and welcome to take 36 of the latest Magpie Circle podcast show. We're rewinding the clock today to welcome back a former favourite regular guest of ours, Leigh Curtis. He's gone the short journey up the A52, but he will be back at Meadow Lane on Tuesday evening for Derby County. Leigh, a very warm welcome back.
Good evening, how are we? Nice to be
We're
back.
all very well. We're all very well. We've got Derby coming up on Tuesday. Then we've got the small matter of Mansfield Town. Sellout crowd, 17,000. I mean,
Wow.
unbelievable. We've had Macalang staff doing a special launch of the Magpie Redemption book video today. I gave you a sneak preview of the book. You're in it. You're interviewed in it. We can talk about that and a little bit more. And I'm sure tonight we'll also be talking quite a bit about a Derby County and a Notts County favourite, David McGoldrick. Apologies for the gremlins at the start of the show. Hopefully we've now got it back and working. Evening all from Pythagorean, from Shane Walker, from Dale Pikett and Alex Jackson. Wayne Wilkins, evening all. Are we going to talk about the Mansfield game too? I'll be flying in from Munich for it. Will anyone be travelling further? Don't forget 12:30, Wayne. And before we go any further, because I don't know if I'd forgot or not realised. Tomorrow, Leigh, the kickoff is against Derby.
7 o'clock.
Yes, that might catch a few people out. I say you, the royal you. Derby County, 2,500 tickets already sold and counting. 1,454 was the total attendance for the game with Wolves, of which I believe it was something like 104 were from Wolverhampton. Why has it captured the imagination so much of Derby fans, this game?
I think it's because two things really. I think because it's local, and the fact that it looks a good game on paper, doesn't it? I mean, it is Notts County who are going brilliantly at the top of League Two. Derby are 8th in League One. I think Derby fans would like to see a glimpse of David McGoldrick again because they never really got a chance to say goodbye. So I think there are a lot of sort of subplots that make the game quite fascinating, to be fair. So, and I just think it's one of those away trips that I think the last time that Derby played Notts was like back in 1994 competitively. So it's been a long time coming. I'm really looking forward to the game. Obviously, I know Notts like the back of my hand, and one of the first results I look for. So yeah, I think it'll be a fantastic occasion. I'm not sure how many Notts fans will turn out, but to be fair to Derby fans, their away following has blown me away. I mean, it is literally every game is a sellout, and the problem that they have, in particular in League One, is that because the away allocations are so miserly, you actually end up getting Derby fans in the home end, which is a different debate altogether. But they took 6,000 to MK Dons last year. They took 5,000 to Liverpool. I mean, the travelling support has been phenomenal. And the support at home for league games, I mean, you're talking even against Cambridge, it was 26,000. I mean, it's Premier League support, really. I mean, so I think it'll be a great atmosphere tomorrow. If plenty of Notts fans turn out as well, it should make for a great occasion.
Ian Birchinall says, I hope Leigh's health is well, although he still has a dodgy haircut. Hi, lads, from Dave Woolley. Yeah, James Moore, likewise. Adi Clark up in Elfrton and Chesterfield. Evening, welcome back, Leigh. James Moore, most Derby fans are secret Notts fans, obviously preferring us to that lot over the river.
I definitely think there is definitely something in that. Like, I do think that Derby and Notts do obviously have a universal, I don't want to say dislike because that's a bit strong, but antipathy towards the red side. So I think that's why they get on so well, and they both play in black and white as well. So it's, I think that's probably one of the reasons why there doesn't seem to be much rivalry between Notts and Derby, because they both have a shared passion for those over the bridge.
Interesting you say black and white, and I know you're right, but I seem to recall, you're too young, but in Clough's Pomp at Derby, they weren't really black. They were a very, very dark navy, if I remember. And then if they kind of morphed into black, I don't know, Derby fans will tell me, in the 90s or something like that.
Yeah, well, I know that the kits that they've had in the last couple of seasons have been a sort of a nod to the past. So their away kit this season is black and blue. It looks like a bit. It does remind me of Inter Milan a little bit. But I think obviously you might be right there. I think that might be a nod back to the 70s. They have done that. They did that with the maroon kit, I think, last season as well. So they are very good at doing that, Derby, in fairness. They do like to have a nod to their history. And both kits this season. I mean, the maroon one last season was a belter. That was my favourite kit. And the blue and black one, I don't think it will be that one tomorrow night, because I imagine that will clash. But that's a nice fetching number as well.
Our Montenegrin branch of the Magpie Supporters Club is out in force tonight. Dimitri, evening all from Montenegro. It's so nice to be part of this Notts County family. Ian Birchinall says 3,000 Rams fans, 2,000 Notts fans, and 15,000 Forest fans tomorrow, with a bit of an exclamation mark. I don't expect Didsey to be anywhere near the team tomorrow, says Crispy. We'll have to wait and see. Notts don't have a great size squad, to be honest, so it'll be interesting to see what we do and don't put out. James Moore, they stole all our good players over the years. They like to remind us they built our stadium. And that was, again, a little bit before your time. It was when Derek Pavis, I think James is referring to, was owner at Notts, and has not slipped out of the top flight. He built the new stadium. And then he sold a series of players that all ended up going to Derby for big money.
Yeah, Dean Yates,
Tommy Johnson, and Craig Shaw.
Yeah.
So Notts got about £8 million for those three players. And Derek, before he passed away, told me the story of when Lionel Pickering came in after he completed the three signings the next time Derby came. And Lionel goes, he said, I bet you're grateful to me, aren't you? He says, I've built this stadium. And Derek's got, I've built it. I've overseen everything. He said, it's all my money that's built it, though, isn't it? Said Lionel Pickering, so that was talk of the town at the time. You're part of the circle, Dimitri from Montenegro, says one of our flock. Wayne Wilkins, Ian Cooksey, in the 70s, definitely blue. Yeah, it wasn't a light, but it was a very, very deep blue that was borderline black. I'm glad I've not actually imagined that. Derby County and Inter Milan, says James Moore in the same sentence. How Leigh's changed. More like into the Derwent. 2.5 million for Craig Short, says James. Yeah, there's 2.5 to 3, I think it was. Yeah. 100% bigger game than Mansfield, says Gary Lee. Stephen Orton just bought the book, or the Kindle version. Looking forward to it, says Stephen Orton. Dimitri says, I'm in the process from Montenegro of getting a British visa. Hopefully, we'll hang out live in Nottingham in a few months' time.
Get him on the show.
Absolutely, yeah. He's posted some videos of him running around his room in Podgorica or something when Notts scored the winning penalty, which is quite funny, actually. James Moore, tickets booked for me and my old mate for Derby. He used to play for Derby under Clough as a lad. Should be a good one, albeit a chance to see the fringe players and local bragging rights. David McGoldrick, Leigh. Whether we see him tomorrow, I think, is a bit touch and go. You would obviously have spoken to him before he came to Notts, and when you did, you I'm not saying you were surprised, but when you did speak to him, it was very clear that his affinity with Notts was absolutely genuine. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a Notts County fan through and through. Obviously started at Notts, didn't he? And then moved on. I think was it Southampton he went to.
Yeah.
He for me last season was the best player in League One without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, he did things on a football pitch that took the breath away, in fairness. I mean, he scored 25 goals. Now, I'd never presumed that he was a natural goal scorer throughout his career. If you look at his record, I think the last time he scored those kind of numbers, I think he was at Ipswich. and then obviously he went up. But what amazes me about him is his brain. His brain was on a different level, and I'm sure Notts fans have seen it already. His brain on a football pitch is streets ahead of everybody else. He just sees things before everybody else. His weight of pass, and what I love about him in particular, and Derby have really missed him this season in that respect, is he never hides. If he doesn't get the ball, if he loses it, he keeps coming for it, keeps demanding it, and and he is just he's a game changer. I mean, he is a wonderful player to watch. I think he's a really great lad as well. Derby would have loved to have kept him. They made him a contract offer, but I was aware back in April that things were ticking along with Notts and that they might come in for him, because actually when Ian Birchnell was in charge, he and I think Richard Keogh had both had lunch with Ian with a view to moving to Notts at the end of, I think it was at the end of, I can't remember which season it was, but anyway, they were going to come. They were talking about potential move at the end of the season, because I think Didsey had always wanted to come back to Notts at some point in his career. And I just think in the end that it was very much a case of romance over finance. I mean, the deal that Derby offered him is better than what he's on at Notts. However, so, I have to pay credit to him, because I think, we lambast players for chasing the money, but for him, it's never been about the money. It's always been about rounding off his career at the club that he loves. And he seems to be thriving. I mean, I watched the game against, I think it might have been Salford. Salford, was it? And, he was doing things in the second half, and I was like, yeah, typical Didsey, great with his back to goal, just a wonderful, intelligent player. And, I can't think of anybody in the lower leagues who has got his capability or his intelligence or his guile. And in truth, Derby haven't replaced him this season, and he has been a big, big miss.
Derek Flowers, we need to exit this competition. More important targets to aim for. Jake Burns, I think we'll see even more from Didsey as the season goes on, which is scary, which is both a scary and exciting prospect. James Moore says, all the Derby fans I know were sad to see him go. How many players would do what he did? Massive respect to him for that. In Birchnell, I keep showing them Didsey goals and assists just to rub it in. Were Derby fans surprised when he left to come to Notts?
I think once it came out that Didsey was going back for not financial reasons, I think, to be fair, Derby fans were like, do you know what? Fair play to him. I mean, there was not a real big kick up. Usually when you lose a player of that caliber, you sort of see, well, what's going on? What's happening at the club? But Derby made him a very good offer. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, Paul Warne absolutely loved him. They still text each other now. But I think once Didsey had set in stone, set his heart on a move to back to Meadow Lane, I don't think anything would have convinced him to turn his back on a move to Meadow Lane. And you have to remember as well, I mean, I think he is 36, 37 now, is he? So, if he had turned down Notts on this occasion, who's to say, like 9 months down the line, that option was going to be there again? So it was very much a case of now or never, really. And obviously he lives in Nottingham, so it ticked so many boxes. But no, I think once it became apparent that it was literally he was going back for the proper reasons, and it wasn't of monetary, it wasn't due to financial gain. I think Derby fans were very gracious and were just like, look, thanks for everything that you did. We wish you'd stayed, but all the best to you.
I guess that there are some parallels, and you mentioned the incredible away support at Derby and incredible home support, and likewise at Notts at the minute, the crowds that we're talking about. Both clubs in the not too distant past really went to the wire, didn't they? Notts were on the cusp. And, with the breakdown of the Chris Kirshner takeover, it was touch and go for Derby. I'm sure all Derby fans think they're better than League One, but equally there is a club. There must be a big badge on the back at Derby. Where are the fans with everything at the minute in terms of, Graham Taylor would always talk to me about managing expectations.
Yeah. It's a really good question. I mean, I think last season, the majority of Derby fans, after everything that happened and the fact that Chris Kirchner's takeover fell through, I mean, that was a complete debacle in itself. And the fact that then David Clowes came in and rescued them at sort of the very last minute, did a deal for the stadium, then did a deal for the football club. And, you know, it was just like this massive sigh of relief, really, that Derby had been saved by a local businessman, a Derby fan as well, through and through. Got mountains of programs, loads of memorabilia. I mean, if you go into his office at Clowes Developments, he's got a big wooden ram on his desk. So he is like a thoroughbred Derby fan. So there was, after he completed that deal, it was just like a massive weight had been lifted off the club's shoulders. But at that stage, when he completed that deal, Derby were in such disarray in terms of their squad. I mean, they returned for pre-season with 5 players. I mean, it's not too dissimilar to when Notts came back for the first season in the National League, and Neil Ardley, I think, had only had 6 or 7. And he was asking people like Michael Doyle and that to find anybody on the fringes who could come in and just make up the numbers. And I think Damien McCrory at that time had come in as sort of somebody had reached out to Damien McCrory and he joined in for training. So it was literally, Derby were literally reduced to ground zero. I mean, but they did remarkably well to recruit the players that they did in such a short space of time. But I think at that stage, everybody was just like, look, we're just glad we've got a club, really. So they kind of got a free pass for last season. I mean, I never envisaged them going up last season. I thought they would do remarkably well after everything that had gone on and the how quick it took for them to sort of put a squad together, the time it takes for players to gel, etc., that it would be a tall order to get promoted. But they made a really good fist of it. I mean, Paul Warne came in September, replaced Leigh, done a wonderful job. I mean, he went on a remarkable 19-game unbeaten run, got a 0-0 draw against Liverpool in the Carabao Cup, went out on penalties, a very disciplined performance on the night. So you did think at that stage that they could go up, but they just ran out of steam, to be honest. I mean, they didn't have the biggest of squads. They were relying on a lot of the same players all the time. And I think once that happens, inevitably the season does start to catch up with you. And towards sort of like the back end of the campaign, around sort of March, April time, they had a couple of iffy results. Finished okay, but then needed to go to Sheffield Wednesday on the last day, and I think they just needed a draw to get in the playoffs. But they lost 1-0 at Wednesday, and Peterborough beat Barnsley in a result that nobody saw coming, really. So they finished 7th, and then you move on to this season. Paul's had a chance to bring his own players in, although they haven't spent any transfer fees because they have a business plan that has to be lodged with the EFL, which they devised themselves, Derby. So what happens is the EFL keep monitoring it to make sure they're not going overboard and descending into levels of complete financial madness. So it has been difficult, really. So it is still very much a rebuilding job. I mean, I imagine that next summer they will be in a much more healthier position in terms of transfers because they have had to rely on a lot of free agents this summer. They haven't spent one transfer fee whatsoever. They've dipped into the loan market. So I think a lot of Derby fans think they have to go up this season. But if you look at the likes of Ipswich, who spent a lot of money to get where they are now, it took them 4 seasons. I think it took Sheffield United 4 or 5 seasons. So it does take time. But with Derby being the size that they are and the support that they will always attract, the expectation is absolutely massive. So, like, for instance, Derby went to Cheltenham on Saturday, who were rock bottom of League One, got a draw. I mean, the 6 games unbeaten, but, you know, the sort of the outcry on social media was pretty incredible, really. So, yeah, it is difficult because the club have got to manage that expectation, but at the same time, they are still in this sort of tricky situation where they are still rebuilding from the ground up. So, it will be interesting to see how they get on this season. I still think they're missing a centre forward, really, a 20-goal season forward. They haven't really replaced McGoldrick. And I still think they are missing a player out wide, somebody who's got a bit of bedevilment, bit of speed, because they've only got one in that Mendes Lang, really. And he's been very inconsistent this season. He was great last term, but he just hasn't had that same kind of impact this season. So there's still a couple of holes I think they need to fill. But they're showing signs, but just consistency is their biggest issue at the minute. They went to Blackpool last Tuesday, were unbelievable, could have won 4 or 5-1 against a Blackpool team who've got one of the best home records in the league. And then they go to Cheltenham, and you're thinking this, like, player for player, this is a total mismatch. And, Cheltenham come out fighting for every inch, and Derby fell a goal behind, and they couldn't get over the line in the end to nick what would have been a valuable 3 points.
James Moore says, Rodriguez gone, 8 games, 1 goal for Oxford. I think they are top, to be fair. McGoldrick in, 10 games, 5 goals. Good business for Notts, I'd say. Ian Birchnell says, I think Crowley is the Ruben replacement, but no doubt Dan and Didsey are quality, and we have not missed Ruben. Your first return to Meadow Lane for how long on Tuesday, Leigh?
My last game would have been, I think, the Grimsby defeat in the playoffs.
Right, the last time. Oh, blimey.
Yeah, because Ian was manager at the time, and I remember doing the Ian Birchnell.
You did a runner, didn't you, with Ian Birchnell? Pre-contract.
He went to Forest Green,
and the game.
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny because obviously Forest Green got promoted, didn't they? And Forest Green ended up playing Derby that year, so I did catch up with him. He was in great form, in fairness, and is now obviously at Wolves with Sean Derry, who's on the backroom staff under Gary O'Neill. So interesting, he got 2 former managers at Molyneux. So that's been my first time back. I'm looking forward to it. I love Notts as a football club. I think it's an amazing club, amazing fans. Made a lot of friends there, and a big shout out to Sean Keith, and I'm not probably sure I'm allowed to swear, but the Piss Poor Tours crew who always come over to Lincoln in the summer for a few beers. Great lads, and brilliant with me, and looked after me on many occasions. And it's always good to chew the fat with them when they come over for a few beers. I have a bit of a sore head on the Sunday after, but it's great. It's a great crack, and it just sums Notts up really. Wonderful club, and it's been great to see him get back to where they belong. I did the playoff final at Wembley. I was a bit unsure because of my record in the playoffs isn't great, and it was emotional really, because I just remember all the strife and all the worry that the Notts fans had to go through when they tumbled out the league after Swindon. They fought tooth and nail to get back where they are, and I just thought of all the people that stood by him in such a dire time really. It did get emotional. Obviously we had the car journey home, didn't we, together? So yeah, it was a great day. It was amazing to see, and I think Luke Williams has done an unbelievable job. I have to take my hat off to the owners as well, because some of the recruitment, in fairness, I mean, I was critical of some of it at times, has been very special. I mean, I like Dan Crowley. I think Dan Crowley is a brilliant signing. I think he would have walked into many League One teams. McGoldrick, obviously. Matt Palmer. I mean, what a player. Great signing. And Bostock as well. So I think, you have to take the hat off to the owners. I think they've been fantastic for the football club. They just stay in the background, keep out of the way, and let the results on the pitch do the talking. And that's the best of it. That's the way it has to be, in my opinion, if you want to create a stable environment for a football club.
Okay, let's do a bit of a deep dive into kind of like ownership management, Wembley. Chris Jordan says, great interview with Macca, by the way, Paul. Yeah, that's gone out earlier today, 12 o'clock. That coincides. The club kindly arranged for Macca to do an interview with me and talk about the Wembley season to coincide with the launch of the Magpie Redemption book. Kindle-only version for the time being, paperback 2 to 3 weeks, and will be out in all various bookshops. You mentioned Wembley, Leigh. And clearly that figures quite prominently in the book, and Macca talks about it quite a lot. I hadn't realised, because you kindly agreed to give me a lift home with the rail strike, that you had an absolutely terrible run of playoff attendances with clubs that you were working for or whatever. I mean, how many losing playoffs was it?
So I worked this out. So I covered 5 playoffs with Lincoln. And they'd lost them all, either in the semi-final or the final. So they got to the final at the Millennium Stadium on 2 occasions, and lost those. Oh no, sorry, I'm talking now. I beg your pardon. It's 6 actually, because I did Lincoln versus Blackpool during COVID. So when Lincoln played Blackpool and they got beat, that was 6. And then obviously the Notts one under Kevin, 7. and then obviously everyone in the National League, apart from obviously the last one where they were successful. So that's 10. So I haven't actually covered a club that's won promotion yet, which is mental, isn't it? It is mental. 25 years of doing the job and not one team has gone up. I've chronicled plenty of misfortune, but not been too many success stories during that time. Plenty of headlines, but not the right ones, really.
Yeah, well, I've cracked it a bit because I do remember. Obviously, we won, and I was waiting around, and of course, basically, all Notts fans in those car parks were in them for 2 hours. And yet, when you'd finished doing your reporting, we came round into the little car park, didn't we? And I met you there.
Yeah.
And literally, we just drove out this road, didn't we? There were no cars, and literally all the way, little back roads through Edgware or up the A1, because I'd parked my car at Grantham station on Friday afternoon. You kindly dropped me off at Grantham. And literally, there wasn't a car. We just sailed, and I ended up getting back into Nottingham about an hour and a half before my son, and we didn't leave till about 8 o'clock.
I know, yeah, it was amazing, wasn't it, coming out of Wembley that day? I mean, absolutely sailed through, because I remember driving to the ground on the day, and it was an absolute nightmare. But getting out, I mean, obviously, I was later out than probably everybody, really. But yeah, it was a great journey home. But looking back on that day, I mean, what a day, really. I mean, there's no better place to see your team win than at Wembley. I mean, it's just moments you'll treasure for the rest of your life. And like I say, there were a lot of people Notts fans who I knew who went there on the day, and it plays such a big, important part of your life, your football club, and because you follow them through thick and thin. And yeah, it was amazing, really. I didn't think it was a very good game, and I thought that the nerves really probably got to both teams, in fairness. But, you're just hoping that you're on the end of the winning side. And like I say, I thought on the day, Notts deserved to win it in the end. I thought that the change of the goalkeeper by Luke was an inspired change. And Archie made 2 magnificent penalty saves. So, but I think you have to remember with Notts that there's a lot more expectation, I think, than on most clubs at that level, even a Chesterfield or a Wrexham. Because they have the weight of history, the world's oldest professional football club. One of the founding members of the Football League had been in Division 1 under Neil Warnock. Just missed out on the Premier League, and it amazes me now. I think to myself, if Notts had stayed up and had been part of the Premier League, say what would have happened? That sort of sliding doors moment. So I think when you've got all that to contend with, and you obviously got the expectations of the fans, I thought the players dealt with it remarkably well last season to push Wrexham as well as they did. And I think, in the end, I think Wrexham's spending got them out of the league, in truth. I just thought they were able to buy a bit more depth. But the way that Notts gave it to them, and went toe-to-toe with them throughout the majority of the season. It was astonishing, really. It was a brilliant story. And I watched as many games as I could. But Notts, for me, were undoubtedly the best footballing team in that division by a long stretch.
You've had a sneak preview of the book, what came out today. You're the professional, I'm the amateur. You're the professional wordsmith. You've read, you've basically, I think, read. I gave you the script. You've read the whole book, and this will get the message board banter going in a minute. You were obviously on the inside as well, so you would know more than most. Let's rewind the clock, because we talk about this in the book. I kind of give like an inside the boardroom track. Spoke extensively with Neil Ardley, who you would know very well, and the Neil interview is brilliant, I have to say. Not because I've written it, transcribed it, but what Neil said is really, really insightful. I do think people will find it very, very interesting. But let's start off with a nice, easy question, because you were covering Notts, and let's welcome the views from everybody else here as well. Send us who you think. Where would you primarily put the responsibility for Notts being relegated that season?
That is a really good question. I think, looking back now, I mean, there's so many things, really, when you look back, and it ended up being a perfect storm, truth be told. I mean, I remember Obviously, Notts got lost to Coventry, didn't they, in a playoff semi-final? So you're thinking that summer really would have been about building on those foundations and going one step further. But when I look back now, the recruitment that summer, absolutely baffling, some of it. And there seemed to me, and this is why I think Kevin Nolan got a bit of a bum deal, because it seemed to me that there seemed to be this notion that Kevin, who had been so successful in the way that he'd played to get up into the playoffs, in which they were a physical team, but they had this dash of quality and flair that made him really good to watch at times, and they were a handful physically. You know, Shola Amiobi up top. I mean, he was a great signing. And then you had Granty, you had Ryan Yates, obviously in the middle of the park before he went back to Forest and then went on to Scunthorpe. And there just seemed to be this notion that Notts needed to transform the way of their playing to become like this uber attractive footballing team on the eye. So they started bringing in players like a Christian Dennis, an Enzio Baldwin, and Andy Kellett, and you're thinking, hang on a moment, these don't look like archetypal Kevin Nolan signings. So that was a concern, number one. And the midfield that season was a joke. And I remember being at a festival, or I think I was at a festival that weekend when they played Lincoln. And at that time, I think there was talk of Carl Henry coming in because the midfield needed some bite. I think the midfield that day was something like Noor Hussin, Tom Crawford. I mean, you know, against a Lincoln team who had signed Michael O'Connor. I mean, that was another baffling decision. I mean, I remember, because I obviously good pals with Mickey, and he'd obviously done his knee, and there was sort of this feeling in the background that he wouldn't be the same again after his knee injury against Portsmouth, because you remember it was Michael Doyle who did him in a tackle. I think it was just a natural coming together, but he got. I think he did his ACL. So there was like this notion, well, you know, that's it. He'll never come back from that. Never be the same player again. And I remember Kevin Nolan reaching out to you saying, look, can you have a word with Mickey for me? Trying to get him to sign. But he wanted to keep him. But then in the background, he had this, no, he's not going to be the same player. So by the end, Mickey had just decided that, no, it's too long, and had already agreed to deal with Lincoln. And he didn't want any more money. He just wanted the same contract that he was on. That's my recollection of events. So he ended up going to Lincoln, and what happened? I think he played 45 games that season, and Lincoln won the League Two title. So I mean, it's just those kind of things, really, that it was a perfect storm. And then you had all the stuff in the background. I think once you don't start the season well, you have all the nonsense off the pitch as well, and there were a lot of stories that season that could have been avoided, really. So I think when Alan Hardy looks back at it, I'm sure there will be times where he would have wished he would have done things a lot differently. So I think, you know, the players that ended up coming in, you had a squad of 40 players. I mean, there was just no cohesion. Trying to keep everybody happy was impossible. There were cliques, which is what happens when you have that many players, because you've got those in the stands who can't get in, and you know, ultimately the buck stops at the top. But you know, that season the players, I think, they were just a little bit weak mentally, truth be told. And I thought Neil did a remarkable job, really. And I'll give Alan his credit. You know, the transfer window that they had in the January when they brought in Doyle, I think Mitch Rose came in, Mikhail Smith. I think Gomez.
10 players in total, wasn't it? A mix of young and old.
And
Schofield in goal they had. Stubbs. Ben Barkley.
Ben Barkley, Ryan Schofield, was he there as well? Yeah. So I think I'll give Alan his due there. I mean, he did sort of, you know, Neil obviously needed to carry out major surgery, so sort of back that. And I remember going down to Meadow Lane, I think, on transfer deadline day that night, and you know, thinking, wow, they've given themselves a glimmer of hope. And I think it was weird because they were the kind of signings that they had needed in the summer. And I think it just goes to show you how important it is to have a head of recruitment and a proper recruitment strategy, because it didn't feel like there was one. and it sort of went against everything that Kevin had done so well. And I think Kevin will be a fantastic manager. He was brilliant for Notts. I didn't think he got a fair crack of the whip, and I am certain at some point, and he's doing really well at the backroom staff at West Ham, and I think at some point he will move out of there and he will get a job somewhere and he will fly. So it was just a perfect storm all season, really, and I think everybody has to take a fair amount of responsibility, but ultimately the buck stops at the top.
Okay. Ian Birchinall says, in terms of who's responsible, Alan Hardy, James Moore, 1000% AH. Dave Woolley says, Neil Ardley wasn't to blame. The club was a shambles. Pythagorean, agree, recruitment, defence not strengthened. Ian Cooksey, Hardy, but the players have to take their share of the blame. Ian Birchinall adds, I will always respect Neil for sticking with us when he could have walked. Chris Gosling makes the point, going out the league has given us a chance to rebuild our club to its strongest position for many a year. Easy to say now we're back up, but look how we have built on the way back. Gary Leigh, David Vaughan, exclamation mark.
Oh, wow. I mean, again, he was like, I remember at the time, like bringing him in, and my immediate thing was, I thought he would be an amazing signing. Now, everybody at the time was saying, well, he was like the Xavi of, he would go on to become the Xavi of League Two. We look back now, cringe. But it just didn't work, did it? I mean, it just didn't feel like, and he was such a good player, and everybody was amazed that Notts had got him. But when you put a team together, he just didn't seem to have the right players alongside him for him to thrive. And it just, there was so many players. And you look now, and you just think, wow, what on earth? I mean, if they'd have got a Carl Henry in at that time, and at the time he was getting over the hill, but they needed like an enforcer. They needed like a real strong midfield player who was athletic. Baldwin did okay, but there was just too many players to keep happy. It's impossible to keep 40 players happy. I just don't know what was going through people's minds. It's hard enough to keep 25 happy, let alone 40. And that's, and I think Neil Ardley did when I look back now, I know I read in your book that you said that he takes responsibility for it because it was his name, but I think he's being harsh on himself, to be fair, because it was almost like, here you are, Neil, here's the steering wheel of the Titanic, look out for the iceberg. That's how it felt. I think the way he stood by Notts, particularly towards the end of the season, when obviously the club was up for sale and there was all sorts of rumours, and trying to deal with all that and trying to keep the players focused on trying to win matches. The fact that they even took it to the final day, I think, is a great credit to his management, because I had read Notts' last rites, I think, about February time. But the fact that they managed to get towards the end and still be within of a shout of survival was remarkable, really. But that day at Swindon was horrendous, just horrendous. Just seeing grown men in tears, a lot of anger, sadness, horrible times, because he didn't know at that point what the future was going to hold. There was obviously a lot of consortiums were mentioned, and nothing had come into fruition. The staff ended up getting paid for 2 months, and it was a very tricky time. And I think I wouldn't have blamed Neil for walking at that point, but what I did think he was, and I don't know whether Notts fans will agree with me on this, but I thought he was a very comforting presence throughout that summer, because he was happy to talk to us. He was happy to talk to the media, tell us what was going on as best as he could. And he was almost like this calming influence. And I think he deserves a huge amount of respect for that, and credit for the way he sort of tried to just, keep everybody calm. And he spoke with great intelligence and empathy, I thought. And I love Neil. I think he's a great manager. I see many parallels, really, with him and Paul Warren. They're both very brilliant people. They're people person, very warm and empathetic, always ask how you are, how's your family, and Yeah, they're the guys who you really want to succeed.
Very interesting. I mean, at the risk of getting shot down in flames, to answer my own question, so the people that say it's 1,000% Alan and all the rest of it, I would say if it's 1,000% down to Alan, the club got relegated. Was it 1,000% down to Alan, the club got into the playoffs the previous year? And was it 1,000% down to Alan that he bought the club off Ray True when they were heading out the league anyway, because they'd just done 10 consecutive defeats?
Yeah.
I don't think look, Alan must take the ultimate responsibility. But if you're asking me, if I was going to point the finger, and I may be different to many people, I would point the finger at that collective group of players.
Yeah, well, I think
for some of the incredibly poor recruitment, and the recruitment was all over the place. If you compare and contrast Lincoln's approach, Lincoln got knocked out the playoffs like Notts. Notts got knocked out by Coventry. Lincoln got knocked out by Exeter. I think
that's right. Yeah.
We had the Cowleys, who Martin Allen had marked my card, a few years earlier when they were at Braintree, said these are the next big thing. And they're at Lincoln. And so you've got Notts and Lincoln both knocked out of the playoffs in the semi-finals. And if you then look at the way the Cowleys and Lincoln approached it, and the way Notts approached it with Alan's kind of very much scattergun approach, Lincoln, like you say, got O'Connor, they got Akinde, the goal scorer, they got
he was a great signing. I mean, he would have been tailor-made for Kevin.
Exactly. The point is, Lincoln did really good business that summer, didn't lick their wounds, just got on with it, came out the traps almost from game one. And you're quite right, because that Lincoln game was quite seminal, wasn't it? When Lincoln battered Notts, and you might have been like aciding it up at one of your festivals that you go to.
I know.
I was at Cecil Bank watching.
I can't remember whether I did cover that game or not.
It was a demolition, honestly. And you know what else was there? It's in the book. Sam Slocum was there because he was on loan at Lincoln.
That's right.
When I spoke to Sam said, and this is a professional footballer, not us as amateurs. He said there was on that day. He said I had a really bad feeling for Notts. He said, and I really did think, although it was ridiculously early in the season, he said I really feared for them and thought they had the potential to go down. And that was Sam Slocum on the sidelines as a pro. But for me, even allowing the scattergun approach, I think you have to put. I don't know where your percentage is. For me, the single biggest reason Notts got relegated that season was an appalling collective group of players. You've been in and around dressing rooms. I have for 40 years. That is collectively, because clearly they were good, but the good players were outnumbered by the bad. They were a quite, I thought, disgraceful group of pros, and that manifested itself in results. I whatever you say about Alan, and I think Neil did a brilliant job, did what he could, I still maintain that group of players had enough ability to have finished 90th, not been in the bottom two for 42 of the 46 games. And I think the players, because Alan is such an easy target, I think the players got off scot-free. And clearly, I'm not naming individual players, but you would know there are quite a few stories about what some of the players got up to or didn't get up to. And Neil covered for all of them all of the time. And I think that group got away with murder, to be honest with you.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well, the decision to change the manager that early on in the season as well, after giving him all that money, I still maintain, I think if Alan had persisted with Kevin, I don't think Notts would have been relegated.
I totally agree. And Kevin, and sorry to put in, and then explain your point. When I asked Neil this, I'm trying to remember, there was a 3-hour interview at a railway station hotel at Victoria, brilliant, with Neil. He said, I'm trying to remember his exact words. He said that it would probably have been best for Alan that season not to have replaced Kevin at all. It would have been far better if he had left Kevin in situ and get on with it. I think the rationale from Alan was he'd spent a load of money. I think he being the operative word rather than Kevin. He'd spent a load of money and wanted the club to go up. And I think Alan's rationale was Kevin won't get us up. The reality, Harry Kewell had a far worse chance of getting Notts promoted. And by the time the club was recruiting for the third manager, the brief wasn't to get Notts County promoted. The brief was to keep Notts County up. And that's how football can change in 2 months.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think Notts would have got relegated under Kevin. I think he would have got a tune out of it. What struck me about the departure at the time was, like, you know, when you're watching a team, you get a feel. You can sort of denote whether the players are really playing for the manager. You get a feeling, and it's you know, and fans aren't stupid; they can see it too. But at that time, you know, I mean, obviously, I knew players in the dressing room. There was no point where the players weren't behind the manager. That wasn't an issue. So what I don't think the club anticipated, or even Alan anticipated at that time, was the reaction of the dressing room to Kevin going was pretty seismic, and not in a good way. It wasn't like, oh, great, the manager's gone, we can get a new guy in. You know, we didn't like that one. They absolutely loved Kevin. So I think, you know, when you've got players like John Stead in that dressing room, players who have played at the top level, and they're thinking, what on earth is going on? You know, it wasn't as if that, like, Kevin had lost the dressing room. It was very much the opposite. He just didn't have the tools. He just didn't have the tools. You know, when you look back at the players that he'd had before, I mean, obviously there was no George Grant was there. Yates had moved somewhere as well, hadn't he? So, you know, that was losing those two was a particularly big blow. But I still maintain I think Kevin would have got enough out of that group to have kept him up. And I think he probably would have got to January and probably did what Neil done. But it's like I said, I mean, there's so many levels of a football club that need to be in sync to be successful. You know, you need to get your recruitment right. It's 9/10 of everything. It doesn't matter how many, you could have put Pep Guardiola in charge of Notts that season and given him that group of players, and I'm pretty sure the outcome would have probably been the same. That's my honest opinion of it. So, I think anybody in those circumstances, with the size of the squad, what it was lacking physically, what it was lacking mentally, I think anybody could have come in. But I think Kevin would have probably just had enough to have kept him up. And it just didn't make sense making a change that early on, because the reaction from the dressing room was pretty seismic. And like I said, he had full respect to the players. So yeah, it's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, look back now. I'm sure if Alan had a time machine and you could take him back to that day, I don't think he would have done it. I think now he'd look back and go, I should never have got rid of him, because Harry Kewell was a complete disaster. And you know, trying to bring in this free-flowing football approach, you know, it's not like what Notts have done now, where they've recruited specifically for a formation and for a style of play. You know, you've got you had Harry Kewell coming in trying to ask Richard Duffy, etc., to try and play this amazing style out from the back, and it was a complete shambles.
James Moore says the buck stops at the top, all on Alan Hardy. Look at what having good owners can do for a club. The Reach brothers are football people, and we are so lucky to have them. Pythagorean Mike Edward saying on a previous Magpie Circle that Thomas was the brains behind Nolan. Ian Birchnell, I'll never forget how some Swindon fans gloated in our demise. Couldn't have been happier with our win last week. They should be careful. Karma can be a right pain, or words to that effect. 1971 Rob M. Couldn't agree more, Leigh. My first year following Notts, a lot of respect for Neil. And I knew there'd be lots of observations on this. James Moore. It's a like chicken and the egg. signed the manager who signed the players. Rescued us at what was our darkest hour, or certainly at that point was our darkest hour. But the way things fell apart over the next 3 years turned us into a bit of a joke. Ian Cooksey, I didn't like Kuehl. Whoops, I've even highlighted that. That's because I pressed the wrong button rather than anything else. Apologies. Let's hide it. I I didn't like Kuehl, but when the players got him the sack, the die was cast. Gary Leigh, Duffy, Nathan Thomas, Dan Jones, Chamberlain, Brisley, Evina, Patching, Crawford. I forgot half of them. Ian Birchnell, look at not strategy this season. Keen to keep the core of the winning side from last season and adding to it, because could easily have cleared the decks and started again. Right decisions were made. James Ford, a team with Hemmings, Dennis and Boldevine up front should not have been getting relegated. Whilst Allen was a loose cannon, no way his signings alone got the club relegated. James Moore, if Allen hadn't done the silly off the field things, he would have saved so much face in our decline. James Ford, while everyone loves Kevin Nolan, how much truth will ever come out about what did go off at the end of the season that we lost out in the playoffs? Alan Hardy paid compensation for Kuehl. He did. It's in the book. £100,000. Believe it or not, when Notts approached Crawley inquiring about Harry Kuehl, Crawley quoted Notts £400,000 in compensation. £400,000. Let's be honest, they still had their pants down for 100 grand. I mean, that's probably one of the worst 100 grands you can ever spend. But yeah, Notts paid £100,000 compensation to Crawley for Harry Kuehl. It was kind of at a time when I think it just started rolling and rolling out of control. Paul Smith, evening all. Lee Curtis, good to see you, chap. About time you got a promotion on your CV, mate. Lincoln flew when you left, now not. Who is to blame?
Yes,
always catches up with you. Ian Cooksey, Exeter away, Kuehl first game, should have set the alarm bells ringing. Well, I think it did.
5-1, wasn't it? I mean, was that? There was
5-1, and Harry got sent off.
That's right.
Into the bargain and ended up being stood in the director's box. Trevor West, one of my old college muckers. I've always been of the opinion that the players were responsible for Notts being relegated from the EFL. Hardy certainly didn't do himself any favours, and the players were able to exploit that. Steve Ramage, some of the players lost by design. It was so annoying when you see them half a yard short on purpose. I'm not sure they're ever on purpose, but I don't think a footballer has to be much less than 100% to rack up a few defeats. Wayne Wilkins, I'm a little bit behind the scenes, but I heard a fan's favourite was one of the most toxic individuals in the club. Look, no names, no pack drill. Look, I would always stick up for players. I've been around many dressing rooms, and what I would say, in terms of compare and contrast, is that I've had a lot of the players, thanks to the club, on the podcast. Macaulay Langstaff did his second podcast with us that's just come out. Had John Bostock last year, brilliant. Connell Rawlinson, fantastic. To be honest with you, I can't remember more at the minute. Kedwin Scott. I tell you what though, Lee, what we have, irrespective of, and clearly results dictate these things, but the characters of the players that we have now, I'm telling you, we have a really, really, really good dressing room. Richard Brindley, in his interview for the book, speaks about it being a different kind of feeling of success. He had promotion with Rotherham, and he thought promotion at Rotherham was kind of like individually good for his career. He's in a good place, really pleased. Yeah, he said Notts was like he was like a brother or part of a family, and we as fans were part of that extended family, which I thought was a very good analogy. Unquestionably, now we have a fantastic group of players as characters as well as their abilities on the pitch. I still maintain there were some terrible signings in that relegation season, but I think, as James Ford was saying, I still can't, but I still refuse to accept there was not enough ability. Now, Neil Ardley will say there was a lack of application, a lack of mental toughness. He speaks about how players were scared in the dressing room before a game, a lot of toxicity, a lot of things going off behind the scenes. Neil was more or less constantly undermined from day one when he arrived. But I think this group of players are top draw.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And also, don't forget that you have the stability of off the pitch as well. There aren't any distractions going off the pitch. You know, you're allowed to just concentrate on the football. The head coach, sorry, is allowed to just get to work on the training ground. The owners stay out of the way. I mean, it has been remarkable to see. What I do like about this Notts team. And it's interesting listening to Richard Brindley talk about unity. It has grown together, hasn't it? It has grown together. You've had Carl Cameron there now for a couple of seasons. Richard Brindley's been there as one of sort of the mainstays, really, who's come up and seen it. Sam Slocum's been there. So that, what I do like about there's always been this sort of continuity in that respect. So you've still got a lot of players who have been through that journey of when Notts got relegated into the National League, and have come through and seen it through right to the end. I think that the team that they've seen this season, like I say, I try to watch them as much as I can when time allows. I did watch them against Salford; thought they were excellent that night. I think they strike me in many ways. Now, I don't know if many people can remember this. Like, I remember when Yeovil and Doncaster got promoted up from the non-league, and literally that was it. They took off, and in the end, I think Yeovil reached the championship, didn't they? So
Yeah,
I mean,
they had guys at Leeds, Dan Burn, defence, unbelievable set of defenders they had.
Yeah, so it just goes to show you what momentum can do for you. Once you've got that feeling, once you've got that spirit, once you've got that harmony, and that's effectively, I think, what you need at a football club to be successful. Everyone has to be in sync. So your chairman has to be in sync with your manager has to be in sync with his players, the fans have to be in sync with what they're seeing on the football pitch. And if you can get all that together, then you have a real chance of being successful. I think, if I look at Derby, I think that's what they've got. They might have to be a little bit patient because it's still sort of in the early stage. I mean, Warren's only probably been in charge just over a year. And of course, he couldn't make many signings. So, but I think if Derby stick with it, and allow him to sort of organically grow the squad because he inherited some players that weren't his, I can see it happening at Derby. And I think once you get that sort of all that harmony, I think you become a very big, difficult beast to conquer. And that's been proven at Notts. They're riding the crest of a wave. They'll be very hard to stop. The fans love what they're seeing. The fans love the manager. So, there's at every stage of the football club, there is no conflict. No ego is getting in the way. Everything's nice and serene. The players can just concentrate on the football. The manager can concentrate on training the players. And that is it. That is effectively it. And that's what builds successful football clubs. It's having that stability, and it allows you to progress. So, yeah.
And I kind of understand where people would point a finger at Alan as carrying the can. I get that, because ultimately, as several of our posters have made the point, ultimately that direction and strategy comes from the owners, because the owners are responsible for recruitment of the head coach or the manager who and in our particular case, the owners have a direct philosophy in terms of recruitment and the way they want to play. But what they do is they pick round pegs for round holes.
Yeah,
that's the big thing. And the other thing is, and I know that the owner you have at Derby, He's not on the back of, which may not be good for you, Leigh. He's not on the back of the Derby Telegraph every night, is he?
No, and he's a great guy as well.
There's a measured approach to it, and I think that is particularly, you know, we won't go off on the tangent of social media and everything, but I think owners have to be patient these days, because we live in an instant society where there is so much pressure put on game to game, half, you know, one half to one half, even, you know, oh, we were brilliant first half, second half we were rubbish, you know, and somehow as an owner you've got to detach yourself from that, because otherwise you'll drive yourself mental.
I mean, if you, I cannot bear, I used to love Twitter, I cannot bear it now at all. Like, you know, if you go, like you just said there, 1 week you are world beaters, the next week you're panel beaters. There's no middle ground. Like I can't remember who, it was a recent Notts game and there was a bit of furore on Twitter, wasn't there? And I was amazed. I was like, hang on a minute, Notts are top of the league. They've won promotion. They're absolutely flying. Probably nobody expected them to be top of the league after getting promotion from the National League, because you sort of expect there might be a bit of teething problems acclimatising to division, and I think League Two, you know, the gap from League Two to the top 8 in the National League is quite big. But, you know, nobody would have expected Notts to be sitting top on the 9th of October, but they've done remarkably well. They've been brilliant. And yet I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But then it's football over. That's football and social media all over. There is no middle ground anymore. And the worst thing is that I found that it actually, because of all the crying and whinging that you haven't won a game, actually numbs some quite decent debate at times. So you have to filter through 600 tweets or whatever of people saying liquidate or resign or manager out now or chairman resign, head of recruitment's got to go. You know, you have to flick through all that nonsense before you actually get to someone and say, well, hang on a minute, what about this? What about that? What about this system? Would this player be better? So, you know, it just kills any kind of meaningful debate, which as a fan, and I'm obviously a huge football fan, you know, you like to have a debate about your team, but how can you debate with somebody just gone, get him out, he's a clown? Like, you know, and the problem is I found with social media this day and age, and I think in general in life, nobody likes to admit when they're wrong. Nobody can say or look back at what they perhaps tweeted 5 weeks ago. So, like, for instance, you know, you'll have somebody who will be like a Warner or a Williams out, you know, hypothetically. The team will go on a really good run. They won't say anything for 4 weeks. They'll lose again, and then they'll call out and say, "Yeah, Warren out, Williams out, or whatever." And I'm just a bit like, you know, I can't bear it. You know, and you never get, like, there's no balance. Nobody ever comes out and says, you know what, I got, you know, hands up, I got it wrong. They're doing well. You know, this player's proved me wrong, or this. And I don't know how other people find it. It drives me insane. And that's what stops me from going on Twitter a lot of the time.
Yeah, and I guess as a professional journalist, your Twitter account is important to you and your employer, because clearly it drives traffic and all the rest of it. And if you're working, for instance, on The Athletic, you have to be active on Twitter. It's part of getting the job and keeping the job. I mean, my 2 penneth on Notts is that if you can just kind of detach yourself and say, right, for 4 years, we were a National League team.
Yeah.
We've not played 1 game in the Football League for 4 years. The previous year, when we were in the Football League, we weren't good enough to stay up. We could hardly get a point. So for 5 years, we have not functioned as a Football League club. So you get promoted, and after 10 games, 12 games, you've got more points than any other club that's been promoted out of that league into the Football League.
Ridiculous, yeah. What they're doing.
And you're top. Now, that for me is 99.9% a tick in the box.
It's utopia, isn't it? Pretty much. I mean, that's football utopia.
What more can you ask for? Well, I was at Colchester and we couldn't defend and we let a load of goals in. But don't judge some individual errors or whatever you want to call it. Look at the 10 to 12 games. We're top. No one in this division has got more points than us. And yes, it's only 10, 12 games. But holistically, that is unbelievable. But the way it works now doesn't work like that. And we had a player, Connell Rawlinson, who unfortunately had a bit of a bite at a fan. And we all understand content creators are creating their own little businesses and all the rest of it. But when you get to all these nuances, Alan Bircham, my good friend, we call it thread pulling, just pulling at things. You're doing 99% of your job good. The 1% you can improve on, right? Fair enough. But you don't give the credit for the 99. You focus and zero in on the 1%. And, it's very, very difficult. The reality is it's only going to get worse, Leigh. It will only get worse. And I didn't do the show last Monday. So we got beat at Colchester.
That's right. Yeah.
Woe is us. Oh, disgrace. I don't know how many of the people actually went to Colchester. I did. Yeah. Batter this, batter that, need to do X, Y, Z. We then put in probably the best 45 minutes for probably 6 or 7 years, right? And see out a 3-1 victory over a previously unbeaten team. And all of a sudden, we're brilliant again. Well, the reality is, we weren't as bad as Colchester. If we could play like Swindon every week, we'll get 132 points. But we won't, because that's what it's about, isn't it? That's what it's about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. I just don't know what I kind of think, and I do blame the Premier League for this now, because I mean, Notts have done very well with the style of play, and they're really attractive to watch. But I think of other clubs where they're not perhaps going to have like the sort of the talent that can play the football that a lot of fans see in the Premier League, but they think it's achievable. They all think like, they all think a team in League Two can play like Pep's Manchester City. They all think like they can play like Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool. When in reality, they can't, because if they could, they wouldn't be in League Two or whatever. And that's what grinds my gears as well. I just think sometimes there is this expectation that every football club has to play like a Liverpool or a Manchester City or a Manchester United or an Arsenal in the lower echelons of English football. I mean, as we all know, that's why I actually quite like the rugged and toughness of the lower leagues. It's got a bit of charm about it. But you will get teams who are physical, but then you'll get teams like Notts who are amazing to watch. But just enjoy it, because you don't know how long it's going to last for.
Spot on.
You don't know how long that this run that Notts are on. And sometimes you'll look back and you'll think, hang on a minute, I moaned after that game. What am I doing? Like, we were top of the league. Like you say, they've just gone and beat Swindon 3-1. And I'm pulling at the 1%. Just enjoy it. Just get on the ride. Because there are 23 other teams who probably would love to be in Notts' position. Yeah. So
biggest plus for me, Jimmy Cyril, old school. Biggest plus for me so far this season with the league table, and I've forgotten the number now. We are something like 18 to 19 points clear of the relegation positions.
50 points is that Keith Alexander always used to say that to me.
Right now, 50 that's the most important thing. Because and if you think that's not being very ambitious, just think back to 5 years. Just think that's where we were. Couldn't get them. So for me, right now, and then if you get to the 48, 49, 50, you reevaluate and you move on. We got 107 points, what it was last year. Hey, I'll be ecstatic if we got 88 or whatever that gets you promotion. I don't want 107. We're not going to we've not been a football league club for 4 years. So don't expect us to rip everything up all the time. Enjoy it for the moment. And the good thing is clearly with the attendances that we are getting that are absolutely phenomenal, by the way. The word has got around. There's a lot of younger, family-orientated groups that are there now. So word has got round. But I think sometimes in your profession, you can't ignore it. And we all try to ignore it. But things like social media just seep through, don't we?
Yeah.
They just seep in.
It is toxic.
And we've got to shut them out. Everyone is entitled to an opinion. Right, but as Mark Stallard says, opinions aren't facts.
No,
they are opinions.
Yeah. I mean, I do liken it to like being in the world's worst pub. That's how I do liken it. Like, but you just can't get out the doors. Someone's put the barricade down, so you got to listen to Barmy Dave, who's by the fruit machine, banging on about why such and such is absolutely hopeless and has got his feet sewn on back to front, and you can't, it's just. And whereas normally you just probably go in the pub and go, I can't bear this. Let's just get out of here. But sometimes, you see things retweeted, so you can't get. People who you follow, you think are sensible, retweet something like, "What are you doing? I didn't want to see that." It is difficult. And it definitely has changed because when Twitter first came along, I was a bit like, "This was great." There was Follow Fridays, you have a good crack, there'd be a bit of humour, and I think as like everything, it got really popular, and then it just after that, it just nosedived really. And then Elon Musk is doing his best to kill it anyway. So.
I'll send my $5 to Elon Musk to shut it down. Raise some money, get him to shut it down.
Send him a copy of your book too.
Chris Gosling makes a good point, and our owners aren't on social media. Luke isn't. Chris Gosling says, I always find that Luke Williams sums up exactly how I feel after a game. Yeah, I think Luke is very good, and I suspect that Paul Warne is a very good communicator.
Yeah,
and I think in the modern manager, the modern head coach, I think the world is such a place now where you have to be a good communicator. I don't think anymore you can get away with coming across as a bit uncouth or a bit ignorant or being clever with the reporter or trying to shut the reporter down because you don't like a question. I think it's a vitally important part because that manager's interview is a way in which you can communicate directly with the fans, isn't it? And they can, listen to what you've got to say and explain quite why that didn't work or what the manager thinks of that. And I think Luke is very good. And I think the players are good communicators and all that helps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's some of the players who are not something. Carl Cameron was very good. Richard Brindley's a brilliant talker.
Sam Slocum is excellent, by the way.
Sam Slocum, very, very good. Very intelligent boy. Trying to think. Matty Palmer's decent. And again, that intelligence extends itself onto the pitch, doesn't it? You got players who are very, very, they're bright as a button. Adam Chickson, very good as well. So I think, when you take all that into account, Connell Rawlinson was another one I always used to enjoy.
Wears his heart on his sleeve, Connell, doesn't he?
Yeah, and I used to enjoy interviewing him because, he told it how it was. There was no dressing anything up. I think that they've got some really good characters at Notts. And, I watched Luke Williams obviously do the press conference after the win at Wembley. And do you know what I thought was the most amazing touch of that entire thing was how he paid tribute to both Neil and Ian Birchnell.
He did, yeah.
I can't think of one manager really who would have come out and sort of said, look, I have to give credit to what's gone on before me because they put the building blocks in place. I thought that was a testament to his character, really. I thought that was very, 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 very good of him and very gracious. And I think you would struggle to hear that from, I think, a lot of managers throughout the Football League. But he does remind me, him and Paul do definitely share very similar traits in how empathetic they are, how understanding they are, how good they are as communicators. And like you say, you do need it in the modern game because I don't think now, as generally in life, as in society, we don't really deal well with cold people. So I think, like players, if you've got a manager who's a bit aloof and a bit cold, I think, I think knowing players and how sort of the modern game has become and like, the ranting and the raving has slowly gone out of the game. You don't get any managers who chuck teacups anymore. Having those managers who are empathetic, warm as people, I think will help you and help your dressing room a lot better than somebody who, like, for instance, I'm going to say a Harry Kewell, who always seemed to me was very aloof and played at the highest level, thought, when you're asking him a question about tactics, he thought, you'd fallen off a Christmas tree. Yeah, so it's the marked difference. And you look at like Neil Ardley, for instance, another person who's cut from that same kind of cloth, very empathetic, doing a great job at York, by the way. Who were in dire straits when he took over, and he's got them motoring as well. So, and again, he is another empathetic character, and I think players like to feel respected as people as well as what they can do on a football pitch. And I think that's where people like Luke Williams or Paul Warne, who's had 3 promotions on his CV at Rotherham, Neil won promotion with Wimbledon. It's no coincidence those guys as people have thrived at clubs across the country.
Yeah. I was going to recite part of the interview with Neil. You just touched on it there about his empathy. But Neil came through the toughest school imaginable as a young player. The Crazy Gang, Wimbledon, nutters, the hardest dressing room you could possibly imagine. Vinnie Jones, Laurie Sanchez, Keith Curl,
John Fashanu, Vinnie Jones, the Butcher and the Beast.
And Neil would talk to you about that was hard. You're a 15-year-old cleaning John Fashanu's boots or taking the tea into a room with all them characters, tough. And he said that what Wimbledon did in that day, and if you tried to manage like that, it wouldn't work.
No.
So Neil went through that as an apprentice himself, but as a manager, he doesn't do that. He's had to learn, as you spoke there, about the empathetic approach. And we'll just finish on one thing, because it's a good story. And part of Neil's character, very accommodating, humility. He'd always talk about his humility and his humbleness. So when you were down at a game, stopping overnight in the 5-star Hilton that the Nottingham Post used to put you in, aka
with the Corby trouser tracks,
Junction 12. Do you remember? And what did Neil do when he found out?
He remembered the game because I read it in the book. I couldn't remember the game, but he mentions it in the book. I thought it was Sutton, but he said it was Bromley, and it might well have been Bromley. And I remember I obviously had a hotel that night, and he said, "What are you doing after the game?" So I'm staying over. I said, it's a long way to come, and I've got a lot of work to do, so I'll stay over far from the hotel. And then I shall get up and go in the morning. So, well, what time we finish? Well, probably about 8:30, 9 o'clock. He said, well, don't hang around on your own if you're going to do that. It's my daughter's birthday party. Livy, I think it was. Libby. It's my daughter's birthday party. It's the 21st. And he was like, look, mate, you come down. Come and get an Uber. I live 5 minutes away from your hotel. Come and grab an Uber. Come round and come and join the party. I said, look, I don't really want to intrude. It's a family get together. All his mum and all his friends and close family were going to be there. And I was like, look, I really don't want to intrude. He said, no, listen, don't be stupid. He said, honestly, you'll be fine. So I was like, right, okay. So I finished about 8:30. Got an Uber, turned up at his house, knocked on the door. There he was to greet me. He had an amazing dog because I love dogs. And he opened the door, he was like, oh mate, so pleased you could make it. Come in, have a beer, grab yourself some food. Neil Sullivan was there, a few there, and it was just amazing. It was just a real act of kindness, and he made me feel like a king that night. All his family were very gracious. Met his wife Sarah, she was absolutely lovely. Met his children. I think there was a point in the night where they joked because I was there. That I can't remember what they were doing. They were doing a video or something. I said I couldn't film it because it had appeared on the Nottingham Post website. So it was that kind of evening. But what struck me about that night in particular, we didn't actually talk about football a lot of the time. It was a lot about family life. Met his friends, and it was a really, really top night. And I remember getting back to the hotel feeling a little bit squiffy. Had a good night's kip, drove home the next day. And by the time I got home, Neil had messaged me, had texted me to say, did you get home all right? And I was like, yeah, no, fine, no problem. Thank you very much for your hospitality. Different class. But yeah, it's that kind of, it's that kind of humility and empathy that I think carries you a long way in life. And I always like to think you'd like to be remembered as a good person as well as a good manager. And he is certainly among them. And And there's been a few like that, to be fair. Paul Ward, very, very humble, very, very accommodating with us all at Derby. Great guy. And it does carry you a long way in life, I think. But yeah, that night was very memorable. And I will never forget it. It was very, very kind of him to sort of extend that. And I've not messaged him yet since he's taken over at York, but I wish him the very best, because I do think he's a very, very good manager, and he will. I think once he gets his feet under the table properly at York and he can make a few signings, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him take them up towards the playoffs.
Lovely story. That's a nice positive note to end on. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow evening. Get there early. It's a 7 o'clock kickoff, not 7:45, everyone. And I'm guessing all the car parking spaces will be nabbed by the Derby hordes, won't they? I suppose. I don't know where we're all going to park tomorrow. But anyway.
3,000 Derby fans, 3,000 Derby fans heading to Meadow Lane. So get there early. Get there early.
And I'm sure a few people will come and say a few hellos to you.
Yeah, please do. Please do. I'm looking forward to seeing sort of a lot of old friends tomorrow night. So, yeah, it should be a great occasion.
Thank you very much indeed for your time, as always, Leigh. Thank you to everyone on the circle for listening in and watching tonight. Don't forget the Magpie Redemption. And I'm going to repeat this for the 47,000th time, because I know some people are struggling a bit. So, Kindle edition is available now, £6.99. There is, by popular demand, a paperback edition. I'm sorting that out with the printers as we speak. That should be club shop or book outlets within 2 to 3 weeks. I will keep you posted on the paperback edition. Good Christmas present. There's interviews with Leigh Curtis. A lot of the stuff that we've talked about tonight about the club dropping out of the league and promotion, all in depth. Some of it you will agree with. Some of you will say I've given Alan Hardy too tough a time. Some of you will say I've given him too soft a time. But read through it. We didn't touch really tonight on a lot of Neil's interview in the book, which is fantastic. And there's some great stuff from Luke as well, talking about his approach and also some of the challenges he's had at Notts, and also his ill health when he went down, Leigh. I don't know if you saw this. He went down with pneumonia literally days after the playoff final, which kind of tells you as well the pressures that all managers, be it Premier League, National League, are under on a constant
immense stress. I would not want that job for all the tea in China. I wouldn't want to be a manager of a football club. Not a chance.
I think it's a little bit like I think once you've done it, it's very hard to get out your system.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Yeah, so it's best never to ever do it.
Yeah. Anyway, James Moore says you can have a listen to the Macca interview later. Yeah, enjoy. He speaks very, very well. Thank you to one and all. Thank you to Leigh. I'll see you tomorrow, Leigh, and we will be back later in the week when we will see whether we are still in the EFL Cup. Personally, I'm not so sure. It would appear I'll be going to put a decent team out tonight.
They will do. Yeah, they will do. Yeah. I mean, their squad. The squad, I don't anticipate any youngsters playing. That is a fact, because they've got some players that need minutes under the belt. They've had quite a horrendous injury record since the start of the season. So, I spoke to Paul after the game on Saturday. It will be a strong team. Yeah. So I imagine the likes of Max Bird will play. Louis Sibley will probably start. I would have thought he'll be pushing for a start. Connor Washington maybe. Sonny Bradley. So yeah, it will be a strong team, I think.
Right. Well, ours will be relatively strong because we haven't got much of a squad, Leigh, in terms of depth. So it's not like you have to play a certain number of players, but you won't see 7 teenagers in our group either.
No, I think it'll be interesting because obviously Derby have got the international break, but obviously Notts have got that huge game with Mansfield on the horizon, haven't they?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I mean, would you want to risk a McGoldrick in that game if he picks up a knock? I just can't see him playing tomorrow night. It's too much of a valuable player, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, most of the first team has played 45 last time when we played Wolves.
Yeah,
we'll have the 2 young lads in Tupton and Macari, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, it sounds like tomorrow will be 2 fairly senior teams. So get yourself down there. It's a 7 o'clock, not 7:45 kickoff. Thanks very much as always, Leigh. Good night from me, and we'll catch up with you all very soon. Cheers for now.
Cheers.